a Bitcoin mining bill, in effect, if not necessarily in name, was slowly moving its way through the local New York State legislature. It had passed the House, it had passed the Senate, but just slowly died with a whimper last Friday with the close of the legislative session. So this was a bill that was sort of brought to the fore, again, during this fervor around the environmental costs of Bitcoin, that initially had said, let's try and ban Bitcoin mining in New York State for about 3 years while the environmental concerns are sort of looked at. That was eventually changed through another iteration to say, technologies that use proof of work can't plug into, the state's electric grid such that, it won't hurt New York's ambitions to be more climate or carbon neutral. And then finally, this last iteration had just kind of said, we're going to look at this closely and we might take some steps, but it died essentially with opposition from the International Brotherhood of Electric Workers, I believe the IBEW, which is the Electric Workers Union. So this just kind of shows, I think, in tracking maybe the Elon Musk tweets, the ways that these things really get spun up. And then as more people look at it, and as more people look at it critically, just slowly kind of die out for lack of a immediate or clear answer, because these things are really, really complicated. But Adam, I want to toss this to you to get your initial thoughts.
Yeah, so, New York has had an interesting relationship with mining, but I think that honestly, a lot of this stuff winds up drawing back to kind of the broader point, which is that there are fewer and fewer ways to actually argue against Bitcoin using any sort of good faith arguments. For a while, there were a lot of things that you could do. There were the criminal arguments. There were the kind of energy use arguments. There have been a number of arguments that have arisen over time. Wealth concentration was another one we saw for a while, but don't so much see anymore. You look at when the, on the one hand, you've got Trump tweeting about this, or not tweeting anymore, but Trump talking about this and saying that he doesn't want anything competing with the US dollar, as we discussed last week, saying the quiet part loud. And then you've got, Elizabeth Warren on the other side of it saying that Bitcoin needs to, we should ban cryptocurrency to address climate issues. These are signs that there just isn't much to say about it. And it's kind of hard to make good faith arguments that then build on those points to get you to the point that you want to go. And my belief is that that's where all of this is going anyways, is that government increasingly recognizes that this is a challenge to the hegemony of currencies and of the kind of regional monopolies that we have around the world. The U.S. is a primary one. And so you're seeing these arguments on the one hand continue to resurface after they've already been addressed. And on the other hand, they're doing so with a decreasing amount of sort of impact because we've already been here before and these arguments have already been made. So to this specific announcement, it's not surprising to me at all. I think it's a continuation of trend that these arguments are incredibly weak and get weaker the more that we hear from them.
Adam, do you feel like, though, we just think the argument is getting weaker because we are in the space and we talk about it every day? I mean, if you look at governments around the world, these arguments and narratives are still ones that are really strong, that are kind of working against the crypto industry, as we'll see in our next story. And so, I mean, I think we think that the narrative is getting weaker, but I think it's one that's still pretty prevalent in international governments and back in the States.
I think it's very prevalent. I don't think that my comment wasn't saying that we're going to see less of these. It's that we've already seen the worst that can be brought to bear here, and it's not that bad. And to the degree that it is that bad, well, people actually really want to solve those problems. So I think that kind of, I would take it from the other direction. I think that we have the advantage of focusing so much on this, that we see these arguments that are made in regional, small context by people who don't particularly understand what they're talking about, or if they do understand, are intentionally misrepresenting what they're talking about. And so we have the advantage of oversight to be able to see this and say, all right, here we go again with this one, right? So I think that's to our advantage, and it's just something that the rest of the world will catch up on. But again, if these were arguments that were going to work anywhere, they would have worked somewhere by now, and they haven't.
I wish I could have been in Albany for this one, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been really interesting to see. I think we're starting to see the political sort of breakdown of the Bitcoin issue become a little bit more clear around partisan lines. I think, I think the Senator Elizabeth Warren coming out and sort of taking a strongly anti-Bitcoin stance has seemingly sort of like cemented like a Democrat position that's anti-Bitcoin, and then sort of in naturally reactive terms, I think the Republican side of the aisle is starting to be like, oh, okay, yeah, pro-Bitcoin, cool. So I would be really curious about at the state level, at the state legislature level, if that political breakdown has sort of ensconced itself in the chambers of the New York legislature, right? Because this was passed in the Senate, did not pass the Assembly. We never got to see what Cuomo was going to say about it because it did not reach his desk. But I would have loved to have been in Albany for whatever conversations were happening about this bill and whether or not those talking points have sort of cemented themselves along political lines. Because I think that, to me, is something I see us moving more closely toward, given some recent pronouncements from DC.
I think I just want to hop in briefly, and then Jen, I'm going to hand right to you. But I think it really illustrates sort of the difficulties of trying to figure out how to legislate around cryptocurrencies more generally. This bill broke down at the end of the day because the IBEW, I believe, was this is a weird bill. We support these sort of climate initiatives, but also targeting a specific kind of business for using electricity is kind of a weird thing to do. So I think that once you start to look at that, and it's really easy to make statements, right? It's really easy to take a strong stance on something. But once you get into the nitty gritty of trying to legislate around it, I think a lot of those arguments are going to break down because there is no kind of clear unitary solution in this regard.